Hey, everybody. It's great to be with you. I hope you're doing great. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us. My name's Jeff, and I'm one of the pastors here. And I got to tell you, if you're new with us, let me just try to put you at ease. Nobody in here has all the answers. None of us have it all figured out. In fact, what we say is that we're doing our best to kind of live our lives with Jesus together. And what we know is that the best stuff we got going at our church isn't what happens on a stage. It's not what happens, from a screen or from or whatever we might capture on our website. The best stuff we got going in our church is the people of our church. And we know that sometimes we trip and fall and we need each other to pick each other up. So however you came in here today, I just want to let you know, I'm grateful that you made it. And hopefully you find yourself to be among people that if you ever did find yourself in a place where you tripped and fell, you might be able to be picked up once again. So let's get right to it. Let's jump right in. Think back to a time in your own life where you were afraid of monsters. Like you had a time in your life where you were afraid of monsters. For some of you, that may be far more recent than you'd like to admit. Some of you, that time is still present right now. You're still actually afraid of those things. I get that. I had real monster fears as a kid. I wasn't really specific in the monsters that I was afraid of. I just knew there was something out there, that I was afraid of. I did hear at one point, someone had told me, that kids with monster fears, which I would have been one, also tended to be kids who at some point, or a lot of times there's some overlap, who they also loved dinosaurs. So that meant that for a lot of the reason that it seemed like for kids who were afraid of monsters, they liked dinosaurs because they could, and a lot of those kids would also, notice this, would be able to pronounce the names of the dinosaurs. Like in some way, saying the name of a dinosaur, which kind of represented the thing that like a monster they were afraid of, if they could say the name of it, it indicated a kind of power over that monster, over that thing. So, when I was a kid, I could say names like this or this or this. I can't say them now, although I know that one is called the Wayway Knotless, which I had someone else help me say. But in any event, these were all things kids could say when they were little because it gave them a sense of power over the monsters. Now, all monsters, as we know, every monster has a place that it lives. We all know that. There's places where monsters live. And there's some part of us where we kind of like, even though it doesn't give us exactly a sense of like protection from from a monster, it does give us some kind of sense, at least of security. Like knowing where they are does at least give us an idea. If there was going to be a confrontation with a monster, we'd know where to stare. Like in the middle of the night, we woke up, we heard a sound, we'd know to look toward whatever it was where we thought the monsters lived. Now, the question is, if every monster has a place to live, where do the monsters live? So think for a moment. You can even, if you want to raise your hand, play, that's great. How many of you right now, just as you're thinking about it, the place where whatever it is when you were a kid where that monster lived was in a closet? Just raise your hand, admit it. There was a closet. You had to make sure it was perfectly closed all the way before you went to bed. Light goes off and on a couple of times to make me, that was you. How many of you guys, maybe perhaps it was under a staircase? That was us. For me, we had a staircase that wasn't even enclosed. You could see right through it, but I thought something's going to try to, as I'm coming down the stairs, maybe it's a garage. Maybe it was, maybe it's just any old darkness, any long hallway. Maybe that's you too, if that's one of you guys. But far and away, the number one place has got to be, anybody, and show of hands again, under a bed, right? Now, also, how many of you, if you had to admit it, you did like a running jump into your bed because you knew there was something under there that might try to snatch your leg as you were jumping in. So you had to jump and vault into it because in the bed was safe, but the monster might try to grab you. You did that a little too long in your life. Some of you guys, I know it happens. That's all right. Now, the question I want to ask us when it comes to monsters in particular is, what if we're not looking in the right place for them? Like, what if we're not looking in the right place for those monsters over all that time where we thought we heard a sound and we looked over, or we were afraid of whatever was under the stairs or something else? We were looking for a monster, but we were looking in the wrong place. So what are we dealing with here? To get into this story here, I'm just going to show you. I'm going to jump in the middle of a thing and I'll help you kind of understand where this goes. Here's the Apostle Paul writing to a bunch of churches in an area of central Turkey, which is now central Turkey, called Galatia. Here's what he says. You, my brothers and sisters, Galatians 5:13, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to break down a couple of words. Here we go. First, let's talk about the word freedom. The way most of us will understand the word freedom, or at least the way that it's talked about now, looks about like this. It looks like unlimited and unrestricted access to whatever, whenever. Now, what's surprising about that is that word freedom, the way we use it now in the 21st century, is actually it kind of resembles something else, another word, indulgence. So it's interesting, to give you an idea what indulgence is, that the most sort of simplest definition of indulgence looks like this. It's just giving all my wants, all that they want. And here, the writer here says, don't use your freedom to indulge something. He says, don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Now, that's the Greek word right there. Sarx is the Greek word for the word flesh. And basically what it's describing, I know there's a lot of vocab here, stay with me. But basically what that's describing is this. It's the basic human default state. And it always has a kind of gravity that's moving towards indulgence. Giving all my wants, all that they want. So here's the verse once again. You got that? We got indulgence and flesh and freedom. Here it is. Look, here it is again. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. So then let's back it up once again and talk about maybe what biblical freedom looks like. Because biblical freedom, at least the way we can talk about it in this context, looks like this. It means being a slave to none. So obviously, no person or a person or a master over slaves. It's obviously saying don't have that. That's obviously what it's also saying, but it's also saying something else, which gets missed. Which for us, 21st century people, we have a little bit more difficulty with this idea, because it also says we can be mastered. That is to say, we can be the slaves even to our wants. So here's the passage once again. Brothers and sisters, you are called to be free. Don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. Like if you had to summarize everything Jesus had taught and put it all of the previous laws, everything in the Bible into one sentence, it would be this: love your neighbor as yourself. What's being said in this passage is that there are two things that are clearly at odds. One is self-indulgence, and the other is self-sacrifice, which is really the essence of love. So the two things that are being set like side by side, and also being told that they're opposites: self-indulgence and self-sacrifice. Now, notice what he says next, the warning he gives to the church. It's fascinating. Notice the language that he utilizes. He says, if you bite and devour each other. I mean, that's zombie behavior. This is monster kind of stuff here. But this is zombie kinds of things. You bite and devour each other. He continues, watch out, there's the warning, or you'll be destroyed by each other. Watch out or you'll be destroyed by each other. If you bite and devour each other, watch out or you'll be destroyed. This is, by the way, remember, this is being written to church people. This is people that are Jesus-y people. This is the audience. And he says, you got to watch out because you might bite and devour each other, to destroy each other, which means the monsters might be a lot closer than we thought that they were. The monsters might be a lot closer than we thought they were. If you bite and devour each other, watch out or you will be destroyed. The point is this. If you or I, if we give all of our wants, all that they want, we are unavoidably going to become a monster, a flesh-eating, biting and devouring monster. If we give all of our wants, all that they want, there is no other possibility except that we become a flesh-eating monster. But we all know this. This is true in every scandal, whether it's in politics or entertainment or sports or whatever. We just watch a person who we watch someone who acts self-indulgently and we watch them self-destruct. That's the way the scandal goes. It's the way it happens all the time. Only, I think it's worth pointing out, rarely is the self-destruction of a person just limited to themselves. Almost always, and in every circumstance, there seems to be fallout that affects other people. It's also the basic premise of reality TV. I mean, that's what it is, right? People who are kind of like us, but maybe they have a little bit more resources or something like that, or maybe they're a little bit more attractive or whatever. But people who are kind of like us, they get all of whatever their wants want. They get all that stuff, and we watch it, and we get to have kind of the kind of vicarious, in other words, to say we get to experience it through them. We get the vicarious experience of what it would be like to be them for a little bit. This is reality TV, right? And then we get to do the other thing. We get to watch the people on these shows self-destruct. They bite and devour each other. And it seems a little bit like when that happens, it actually seems a little bit like justice, like they really didn't deserve all the stuff that they got that we should have. And so all of a sudden they bite, devour, and, they just self-destruct. It feels like it's sort of justice for those moments. But the reason why people watch these shows and the reason why why we watch these shows is because we know definitively when we watch them, that's where the monsters live. Look at these people biting and devouring each other. I'm so grateful that I'm not them. But that leads us to another layer in the monster problem that we're facing. So to give you some background on the story in Galatians, here's what's going on. The issue facing the churches, not just in these churches, but in really the early church at large, the issue is this: should non-Jewish Christians, meaning people that grew up without the Hebrew tradition, should those people have imposed upon them all the 613 Jewish laws of the Jewish tradition of the Hebrew Bible? Is that all? Because we're going to have all of these people are coming together, and the Greek people, the Gentiles is what they're called, the culturally Greek people are living in kind of wild ways that are completely antithetical to the way that the Bible taught. And so now you have these people coming together, and they're like, shouldn't they behave like good Jewish folks? And it's not that unreasonable, to be honest. I mean, Jesus was Jewish. I mean, he's the Jewish Messiah. He's the Jewish king. He's the king of the Jews. His very ministry, who he is, everything is the culmination of the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish story. And even when it comes to Jesus, when it comes to these laws, the law, which we'll just put into one singular word, the law, just referring to all of the Hebrew scriptures and all the laws, he even says this about the law. He says, don't think I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So even he doesn't seem to be opposed to it, right? Well, to shorten a lot of a story here, essentially what happens is that the leaders all kind of come to a consensus, essentially, that says this: look, we're not going to have any additional requirements on these folks who are turning to Jesus. Specifically, in the book of Galatians, what's actually being addressed specifically is circumcision. So guys, everybody can come be a part of our church. And there was a question where it was you can be a part of our church if you go through this particular, very specific marker that the Bible prescribes for people. And you can imagine a lot of people going, I don't think this is for me. There are other ways. Is there another test I could take? Can I do a Rubik's Cube or something else? But this is not something I'm willing to do. And you can imagine there was obviously some relief when the leaders of the church decided that wasn't going to be an issue. In any event, what's happening in the churches in Galatia is they're actually still trying to figure out, should we enforce this? So you get the idea. To kind of give you a sense, and this is a little bit technical, but I'll give you some understanding of how the law, the Hebrew law, and Jesus actually go together, and I'll try to sum it up. But here's what's the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament says it like this: the essential and basic negation of the law in Jesus consists in the fact that he deposes it from its position of mediation. I know that's incredibly technical. I promise I will help you in a second. So the essential and basic negation of the law in Jesus consists in the fact that he deposes it from its position of mediation. Continues. What determines man's relation to God is no longer the law and man's relation to it, the law. This decisive position is now occupied by Jesus himself. Now, to put that in plain language, it's basically just saying this. Look, the basic way to say it, as I lost my place right here, the basic way to say it is this. Oh, here we go. All of that saying is between people and God, what used to be the law that mediated their relationship between people and God is no longer the law. It's Jesus alone. Mediated, meaning what goes between the two things, between people and God. That's the mediation. So no longer is it going to be the law that sort of helps people understand whether or not they're good with God. It's going to be Jesus himself. And the problem you see that's happening in these Galatian churches is that people began insisting that, no, wait, you don't understand. Jesus alone isn't enough. We can't just have people joining us and then just because they believe in Jesus, they're going, no. We have to add these other things that helps people to understand what it means to be us. In fact, you can't even be us if you don't meet these additional kinds of requirements. Like Jesus, people began imposing additional requirements on what it meant to be a true follower of Jesus. Jesus wasn't enough. And this is why they're writing these words. Now, has that at any time historically, in the present, in the past, ever felt familiar to you? Where people might say, who are on the inside of a kind of Christian community might say, look, if you don't vote like this or say these words or do these things, then you're not Christian and you're not us. It's like there are new admission standards for belonging to and being a part of life with Jesus. What's interesting is all groups of people, not just, Christians, do this, that people start beginning to sift people into sort of, this is what it means to truly be us and what it means to truly not be us. It's a default position of human behavior to go to a place where we start saying, there's other requirements for what it means to be truly a member of this tribe or this community or whatever else that it might be like. To quote the Bible once again, if you go on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. Here's Tim Keller on the subject. He says, the sinful nature is that within us which wants to be our own Savior and our own Lord. The sin underneath all sins, the motive for our disobedience, is always a lack of trust in God's grace and goodness and a desire to protect and guard our own lives through self-salvation. He's saying essentially, look, we're trying to figure out how to not need Jesus at all. And the warning for the Galatian church is for both groups of people that are kind of represented here, is that it's not just for the self-permissive, all those people who give all their wants all that they want, but it's also for the self-righteous. You see, like, people will try to become their own savior or decide that they don't need a Jesus at all. And that's true of both the people who are self-permissive, I give all my wants, everything they want, and the people who are self-righteous, because the effect is the same. It's still kind of a form of indulgence. In other words, the effect is the same. It'll be biting and devouring, and that's the warning that's been given. Because self-permissiveness and self-righteousness are both equal forms of self-indulgence. We don't tend to think of them that way, but they both lead us to the same place, and they both lead us to the place of biting and devouring and destroying each other. Now, let's go back to the original question. Where do those monsters live? Like, what if we're looking in the wrong place? Where do those monsters live? At the end of Jesus' sermon, like kind of towards the tail end of Jesus' most famous sermon, it's called the Sermon on the Mount, his teaching. He talks about everything from prayer to marriage to sex to like money to how we treat our enemies and all kinds of stuff. And at the end of that, sort of, as he gets to the end of it, he kind of, there's 3 chapters in it, so Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And when he gets to Matthew 7, he starts with these words, and maybe you've seen them before. And I think we have a pretty interesting relationship with these words. He says, Matthew 7, verse 1, do not judge, or you too will be judged. Like, this is like I said, we have an interesting relationship with these words. Like, is all judging at all times always bad? I mean, like, what about really egregious, like gross things that people do? Shouldn't we judge that? Isn't that something that we should like carve out a little space for that? Well, or not at all. I mean, he says, do not judge, right? So does that mean in every circumstance? I mean, what about this? Like, if we said all the judgy kind of people, those people, the judging people in the world, all those people are really the problem. If we get rid of those people, everything would be great. But that's also a problem because in effect, it's also a judging of the judgers. And what do we do with all of this stuff, right? Now, so let's tackle this. Let's talk first about the word judge. The word judge is this word in Greek, it's krino, which literally means obviously the word judge, but it also has another definition. And that might actually shed some light on this. It also means condemn. And the way you can tell whether it's just like a regular old judging kind of scenario or it's condemning is 2 different kinds of things. Because a judge, for instance, that's just an evaluator. Judges evaluate singing and baking and surfing and music and, dancing. And when you were a kid, although whether or not your particular teacher was, evil or not, you had a judge for your grades. They judged your algebra skills or whatever else you had to learn about at some point in your life. A judge is just simply an evaluator, and there has to be a judge. We have to have judges. And the reason for that is this, and this makes sense, hopefully, but we have to have a judge because without any kind of judging, there can be, notice this, no forgiveness. I mean, something has to be wrong We have to judge that a thing that happens to us or in the world is wrong so that we can move to forgiveness. But if there's never anything wrong, if there's nothing ever gets judged to be wrong, then nothing can ever be wrong, which means there's no forgiveness. Everything has to then be okay. So what exactly is going on here when Jesus says this? Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged, and with the same measure you use, it will be used to measure you. Does that make sense? So in other words, it's not just simply saying that there's no reason or no place for any kind of judging. It's just saying if you do it, and when you do it, whatever metric you use to evaluate anybody else, you're putting it on yourself as well. And then he says probably the most famous, maybe analogy he uses in the entire Bible. And he says this, and you've probably seen this before if you've been around the Bible at all. If you haven't, maybe you'll just recognize the language. Here's what he says. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye? Okay, so remember, this is about judging. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye? Now, can we agree? A speck in anyone's eye, bad. Like, it's always bad. Like, none of us have ever had a thing in our eye and thought, this is great, I'm just going to keep this going. This feels pretty great. This is awesome. Tears streaming down your face, your eyes getting red. It's the most annoying, most frustrating thing in your life. So we can all agree that it's bad. Could we also agree that removing that speck would be really a good thing? Like, that's actually a great thing. So this is a legitimate problem in need of a legitimate solution, and that removing a speck would be actually a really great idea. We could all agree on that. Now, here's what he says. So bear in mind everything that's happening here. And why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me get the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? Notice this. This makes a lot of sense when you think about it in those terms. When you think about it in the most literal form of the word picture that's there, if there's a 2x4 poking out of your face, and imagine leaning in to help someone else remove a speck from their eye, you're actually going to cause more damage in them. Are you with me? Like, you might actually give them another issue with more stuff in their eye. You might knock them out. What he's saying also is this, that what's obviously present in me, so obviously, and in this case, absurdly present in me, is also somehow invisible to me. I can see it in you. What I see that's problematic in me and in my life, I can't see in my life, but I can see it in someone else. He continues, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your own brother's eye. Take the plank out of your eye, then you'll be able to see clearly to be able to remove the speck from your brother's eye. What the irony of the seeing here is so amazing. I can only see a speck while the 2x4 is sticking out of my face, but I can't even see the 2x4 to begin with. So once again, where do the monsters live? I have this, and I have this sense, we're Southern California folks. We, whenever you drive around, see people, you do stuff. Don't you sometimes feel like so many people are just so shallow? You know what I'm talking about? Like, they're just so into their own appearances and stuff. I just want to yell sometimes, like, get over it. Just, it's where we kind of live, right? And I started to think about my own life a little bit in context of that, because, my doctor's like, you got to eat right and you got to exercise and, but I mean, is that because my doctor says I should do that? Am I trying to eat right and exercise because my doctor says it, or because when I am feeling when I actually do manage to, like, and I'm eating better and exercising and I feel like I look a little better, I actually feel better about myself? Or is it also that maybe when I'm not doing those things and I'm getting a little squishier and sort of the back fat's accumulating a little bit, it's, like I'm still moving up and down when I'm not moving up and down, if you know what I mean? Maybe I feel worse about myself when those things are happening too. The money I spend on hair goop for my receding hairline, it's not because my doctor is like, Jeff, we've got to talk about something. You have an enlarged forehead and it's getting larger and we need to talk about it. No, doc, is it serious? Well, it doesn't look good. I got to be honest. I knew you were going to say that. I know, but is it really that other people are so shallow? Is that really what it is? Or am I just embarrassed because I'm so shallow? Maybe that's where the plank is, or where the monster is in my own life. When I was in college, I was in a fraternity, and I was one of only a handful of guys that were kind of, Jesus-y kind of guys. So I was always the guy that was, if this was before Uber and Lyft, it was always like, Maguire, can you come pick us up? And so I was always picking people up from the bars. And I think there's a part of me that I always felt like my life was better, but then I started to feel like I was also kind of better than them. Like all of a sudden, the self-righteousness started to creep into my life, and I was like, I'm better than these other guys. And these were guys who were confessing stuff to me. Who I was like, when things were really tough in their life or their whatever it might have been, they would come to me and talk about stuff, and I felt really honored by that. But I started to actually feel a little bit better than them. I think I was actually a little bit envious of the life that these guys had. It was a life I wasn't allowed to have. It was a life that, because they got all the wants all of their wants, they got whatever they wanted. And I think that really did feel to me like freedom. And so in a lot of ways, I guess I was condemning in them what I was envious of. Where are those monsters? Where do they live? As a parent, before I had kids and we were, newly married, I remember I was like, I said a lot of times to Amanda, and we said back to each other, we're never going to be like them, like those parents. Especially at the time I was a youth pastor, so it encompassed all kinds. I looked at a lot of high school kids. I was like, oh my gosh, when we have little kids, they are never going to eat that. I'm not going to let them say that. When they're older, I'm not going to let them wear that or do that. I'm certainly not going to give them a little mediated little screen to keep a little device so they don't bother me when I just need a little bit of quiet for a moment. I'm not going to do that at all. And then I had kids and I started to realize, oh my gosh, these parents who weren't dealing with that thing that was so apparent to me that I saw in them or saw in their kids, it's just a battle they had run out of any ammunition to fight any longer. And it was like, that's not the one I'm choosing to fight now. Oh. Where are the monsters? Where do they live? You see, what happens is we act by confronting the monster I can see in them, whoever they are. By confronting the monster I can see in them, I avoid having to confront the monster I cannot see in me. By confronting the monster I can see in them, what I can see in you, I can confront, because when I do that, I can avoid having to confront the monster that I cannot even see in me, but somehow I must know is there because I can see it in you. Now, there's a fair question some of you have, and it's worth kind of spending a moment on. What about instances of like clear abuse or neglect or some kind of injustice that have happened to you or someone that you care about? I mean, if I call that person, if I call it out in someone else, is that really in me too? Let me help shed a little light on this. First, Jesus is not advocating for any kind of victim blaming or shaming. That's not what this is at all. Whatever that happened to you that they did, that was wrong. That was wrong. And some of you have been holding on to the fact that you think it must have somehow been it was wrong. And our tendency, though, is to hold kind of a rightly deserved condemnation for those people, and they did deserve it. And it feels like power. But that power eventually in us becomes its own monster. And Jesus, he seems to be leading people to a place where they can release whoever it is that did that thing from the bitterness that they hold in their own lives. Like we are able to release a kind of bitterness toward those people because, and I know what that's like, because at the end of our anger, we're afraid that it makes it okay, and it doesn't make it okay. But what we find is that as our own bitterness starts to dissipate, so does this newly formed monster in us and all of its power. It too begins to get to diminish in its power and its control over us. So yeah, they rightly deserve some condemnation. But as the bitterness dissipates in us, it doesn't make it right what they did. It doesn't make it okay. But that bitterness sees it clear to the end of this monster that's losing its strength when we begin to do that. You get it? Now, what do we do with all this stuff? Because Jesus seems to be saying, look, it's possible to have a moral framework for your life without becoming a self-righteous sort of person, that also the self-righteousness that plagues these kinds of things. He says there's a way to do this, but we have to take these monsters seriously. So how do we do it? And we're going to spend some time over the next couple of weeks talking about some of this stuff, but let's just start here. Let's just ask the most obvious question. Okay, you ready? Why are they driving me crazy? Just think about it for a moment. Why are they, whoever they are, those people that you just keep going, why I can't abide that they would do, why do they do that thing that drives me crazy? Why are they driving you crazy? If you see it in them, it's in you. You just don't see it. Why are they driving you crazy? Because if you see it in them, it's present in you. Is it the way that they drive? You know, is it how they interrupt you when you're talking, like you're mid-sentence, and like, wait, and they just sort of interrupt? Is that it? Is it how they're never on time? Is it the person that they're choosing to date? Is it how they handle money? Is it their temper? Is it how they never seem to be humble enough to ask for directions? Is it how they load the dishwasher? Is it how they chew? Is it how they make whatever sound they make when they breathe? Is it the way they walk or tie their shoes or how they dress? What is it about them that's driving me crazy? From the littlest thing to the biggest thing you can imagine, what is it about them that's driving me crazy? Because, to remind us, the monster I can see in them is the monster I can't see in me. Why are they driving me crazy? Now, one of the ways that the early church began to sort of practice a way to deal with this sort of stuff in the early church, one of the ways they started to do it was this. They needed a regular practice to remind them of this very reality, that the monster I can see in someone else is the monster I can't see in me. And the way that they did it was in something called communion. Because in communion, all it is simply a confession. It's a confession that we are where the monsters live. It's this admission that we cannot defeat these monsters that live within us by ourselves. And we actually need Jesus, because he needs to be bigger and stronger than the monsters, because we can't do it. And somehow or another in communion, this taking of the bread and the cup, which you'll get a chance to do in a moment, it's literally like where the self-righteous and the self-permissive both meet at the cross and go, there's a monster in me that's got control, and I need help. That's all that communion is. So Jesus, on the night of his betrayal, in front of his own disciples, on the night of his betrayal, he just says, he takes bread, and after he gave thanks, he broke it and he gave it to his disciples, and he said, this is my body, which is given for you. And in the same way, he took the cup, saying, this is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. The sacred sort of relationship, agreement, sealed between God and people. That's what covenant is. The sacred agreement, the sacred covenant, this covenant in my blood. And every time you eat this bread and you drink this cup, you do so and remember me. You acknowledge, to use our language, that there's a monster in you that Jesus has to take over and defeat. Because on the cross of Christ, all the sin and evil of the world was absorbed onto him, and he put it to death. Jesus, the one between us and God, puts the monsters to death. So in a moment, you're going to get a chance to receive communion. Before we do that, would you pray with me? Jesus, every one of us, all of us, we've got monsters we're not really wanting to deal with. God, forgive us for the times that we found it in other people and we exploited it so we wouldn't have to deal with it in us. So now, Father, as we go to communion and we get a chance to respond, Would you draw near to us? Would you meet us at the foot of the cross as we receive these elements of the bread and the cup? And so, Jesus, it is in your name that we pray. Amen.